Welcome to Outside the Bubble, where at the Launceston Global Shapers Hub, we help to give an insight into what else is happening in our community and in our world while we're staying at home. I'm Ella French, and today I have with me Meg Alexander, who has cystic fibrosis. So thank you, Meg, for joining me today. So firstly, can you please tell me what cystic fibrosis is?
Yeah, so cystic fibrosis, or CF for short, 'cause it's a lot easier to say, is a genetic recessive condition, which means that in order for me to get it, I had to have a gene passed on from my mum and my dad. And what CF does, it affects the CFTR protein in the body, and that affects how the salt and water channels work. So CF is sort of most known, I guess, for affecting the lungs. So in a non-CF body, lungs they have like a sort of thin secretion in them, but in CF the secretion is thick and sticky, which means that bacteria can easily get trapped in there, and that leads to sort of recurring lung infections, damage, hospital admissions, and generally tends to be the leading cause of death within CF patients. And currently I think the life expectancy for CF is about 38. The CFTR protein also affects other areas of the body, but lungs sort of are the main one.
Yeah. And so what do you think has been probably the biggest impact for you with coronavirus, I guess in particularly as a vulnerable person?
So as a vulnerable person, I have had to basically stay home, like I said, with the lungs, with the thick, sticky mucus. A regular cold is quite dangerous for me because any infection or damage in the lungs sort of adds to what I was saying before about the increased infections and lung damage. So yeah, a cold is normally fairly bad, so I try and stay away from colds because they tend to cause more damage. Obviously coronavirus would be really, really bad, so that's meant that I've had to stop working, and I've been self-isolating for probably a bit over 2 months now, maybe. So I've been at home, I haven't been able to go to groceries, that's all been delivered, so my world has sort of become very small to try and minimise my risk of contracting it, I guess.
Yeah, huge impact. And I think, would you say that it's probably a bigger impact than other people would experience that don't have a chronic condition?
I would say in one way it definitely is, because I know sort of people that I know in my life, a lot of them are still working in some capacity. I'm a hairdresser and have chosen to not be working because it's obviously a job where you're coming into contact with a lot of people, and something like this that is spreading through contact with people makes that sort of a high risk environment for me. So in that way, I think it's probably impacted me differently to people who are not as vulnerable. I guess in some other ways, maybe it hasn't. Like there's certain things that I think people have sort of had a really steep learning curve with that I potentially haven't. So having to be really mindful of how viruses are transmitted, and hand hygiene and sort of that kind of thing have been pretty prevalent for my whole life. So that hasn't been a big change for me, but sort of having to stay inside, and I guess my world becoming really, really small to keep me safe is probably a bigger impact than someone who's not vulnerable.
Yeah, definitely. And that makes sense. And so I think, when you're talking about the hand washing and the different things that, we have had to implement over the last few months, do you think things like that, or what other things do you think that maybe people have taken away or will take away from this pandemic in terms of risk to vulnerable people? Do you think there are lessons that maybe people are learning that they didn't know before?
I think I'm fairly hopeful that at the very least for me, people will find it less confronting if they see me wearing a mask or using hand sanitizer, or maybe have a little bit more of an understanding of what it might be like to be fearful, of contracting something and having pretty bad consequences for you. But I'm also, I guess, kind of hopeful. I know that the hospitals have had to sort of have a pretty steep learning curve with all the corona procedures and stuff in place, and everyone working in healthcare has a pretty good understanding now, I would say, of how viruses are spread and that kind of thing. So I'm sort of hopeful that maybe once this does quieten down, my healthcare will mean that, like, not just my CF team understand how important hygiene and cleaning stuff and stopping transfer from patient to patient is. Like with CF, between CF patients, it's really important that we don't come too close to each other. So the social distancing thing has kind of been a part of my life again for forever, because with CF, with the damage to your lungs, different people sort of colonise different bugs and they can become antibiotic resistant. And then one CF person can have sort of a different cocktail of bugs to another one, and it's not really advisable for us to be close to each other, because we can share those, and in turn sort of just it can be detrimental to both people with CF's health. So in CF circles, it's fairly important that everything is kept clean. For my clinics and everything, you go in with a mask, you go into your own room, you don't come in contact with anyone else with CF. But when we step out into other sort of medical fields, sometimes that knowledge isn't there, or maybe it's hard for people to grasp. So I think I'm hopeful that with sort of the mass knowledge that's happened with this, maybe some of those other areas in the hospital or other sort of health areas that I might be seeking treatments from will be a little bit more understanding if I say that I have CF and so I need it to be cleaned, or I need to make sure that I don't pick up anything from other people. That'll be a bit easier for them to grasp or take seriously because of what's happened with Corona.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really important that people are aware, not for the pandemic and for ourselves, but for vulnerable people in general. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us today, Meg. If you want to find out more from our discussion, then have a look at our Examiner newspaper where you can read more. If this is the first time you've joined us today, this is a part of a larger series to explore different parts of our community and our globe. So please take a look at the other videos that we have uploaded to Facebook, which is Launceston Global Shapers Hub, and YouTube. And if you want to find out more at the Launceston Global Shapers Hub, just connect us online where you can find out more about our global community. So thank you, and we'll see you next time.